It is 1978. You are 9 years old. The sun is going down over a quiet American street, and you are sitting on the concrete curb outside your house because both of your parents are still at work, and you have been alone since school let out 3.5 hours ago. Your key is on a shoelace around your neck. The house behind you is empty. Nobody is coming to check on you. Nobody is tracking where you are. And nobody will ask later what you did with those 3.5 hours, because the question will not occur to anyone. You were not the only 9-year-old sitting on a curb that evening. There were millions of you, across every state, each one alone, each one waiting, each one quietly learning something nobody had planned to teach. This is Generation X, the last generation that grew up unwatched. And the psychology that formed in that empty house, on that curb, in the long hours between school and dinner when nobody was looking, is one of the most precisely structured and least discussed adult psychologies in modern American life. In the next 10 minutes, I will name the 6 specific psychological traits that formed in the children of this generation and why those traits are still running today in adults between the ages of 43 and 61. And toward the end, I will name the one thing about Gen X almost nobody describes correctly, including most Gen Xers themselves. You are 8 years old. You knock over a lamp in the living room. It shatters. There is no adult home. There is no phone call you can make because your mother is at work and long distance costs money, and you already know not to use the phone for anything that is not an emergency. So you do what every Gen X child learned to do in that moment. You decide, alone, in real time, what to do next. You sweep the pieces. You throw them away. You think about the story you will tell at dinner. You think about whether the story will hold. You are 8, and you are running risk assessment on a broken lamp with no one to consult and no one to correct you. Psychologists call this a high contingency environment, where actions and outcomes are directly linked without buffer time, without parental narration, without the modern choreography of adult management. Your brain learned to predict consequences in real time. The adult who grew from that child thinks 3 moves ahead in ways that bewilder younger colleagues. It is not strategy. It is the residue of a decade when the scraped knee at 3 in the afternoon was your scraped knee until 6, and you figured out what to do with it. The thing you built to survive an unsupervised childhood is still the strongest structure in most rooms you walk into. Younger generations mistake it for stubbornness. It is not. It is the only nervous system in the room that was built to run without external monitoring. That was the trait on the surface. The next one runs underneath it. Look at the Gen Xer in your life. The social media account dormant since 2014. The parent who gets visibly uncomfortable when their adult child posts about the family. The coworker who has been in the same office for 12 years, and none of the younger employees can tell you whether that person is married, has children, owns a house, or lives alone. This is not shyness. This is not coldness. This is not antisocial drift. This is a deep, early trained belief that visibility is risk. The less anyone knows about you, the less they can use against you, the less can be held in a permanent archive you cannot delete. Psychologists call this disclosure aversion, a privacy orientation calibrated in a pre-surveillance childhood and never recalibrated because it was never wrong. These were children who grew up before the internet, when an embarrassing moment disappeared the day after it happened, and then disappeared again a week later and was gone. Not guarded, trained. Not cold, calibrated. Not private, unwatched. The next trait is going to sound like it contradicts the previous one. It does not. It clarifies it. Gen X is the least openly enthusiastic generation you will ever meet, and simultaneously the most reliably hopeful one. They do not cheer. They do not overcommit. They do not perform excitement. They also consistently show up. They finish. They deliver. They keep going when the younger generation spirals and the older generation retires. Psychologists call this defensive optimism. The hope is real. The performance of hope has been trained out of them, because the performance of hope was one of the things the culture of their childhood kept punishing. Watergate, the oil crisis, parents who promised things that did not arrive, the Challenger explosion, which they watched live in their classrooms on a Tuesday morning in January 1986, while their teachers stood at the front of the room not knowing what to say, a public collapse of a promise made in their name. They kept the hope, they stopped announcing it. I want to pause for a moment. If you are a Gen Xer watching this, everything I have named so far is probably arriving not as new information but as language for things you have always known. If you are younger, and you clicked on this because of someone in your life, what you are hearing is the operating system of someone you care about, described in plain language for the first time. Both of those are good reasons to be here. Both of you are exactly the viewer this video was made for. The next trait is the one that confuses younger generations the most, because of how thoroughly it looks like the opposite of what it actually is. Once you understand it, a whole category of behavior you have been misreading will start reading correctly. The Gen X child watched adults with titles make bad decisions. Parents, teachers, coaches, politicians, principals. The title did not guarantee the competence. The child internalized that rank and skill are not the same thing. The adult, today, respects demonstrated ability almost unconditionally. They will follow a junior employee who knows what they are doing before they will follow a senior executive who does not. Psychologists call this a competence-based authority orientation, and it makes them difficult to manage by people whose authority rests on title alone, and invaluable to organizations whose leaders are actually competent. A study published in the Journal of Adult Development tracked generational trust in institutional authority across 4 decades and found that Gen X reports the lowest baseline trust in formal hierarchies of any living generation, while simultaneously reporting the highest willingness to follow demonstrably competent individual leaders. This is not cynicism. It is the Reagan-era child, now in middle age, still running the pattern recognition that kept them intact. The skills you developed before the internet existed are skills that cannot be downloaded. The ability to sit with a problem for 3 hours without reaching for an answer is a cognitive capacity most of the current workforce has lost. You have not lost it. You never put it down. Before I name the last 2 traits, I want to recalibrate something. Everything named so far has been adaptive. Each of these traits was intelligent when it formed. The last 2 are the ones that show what that intelligence 40 years later has become. Pull back. The culture now treats aloneness as a problem to be solved. Loneliness is an epidemic. Isolation is a diagnosis. Solitude is something you have to be taught to tolerate. Gen X was raised to treat aloneness as the default condition of being alive. They are not lonely when they are alone. They are at home. Psychologists call this solitude tolerance, a baseline aloneness installed in the long Sunday afternoons of the late 1970s and early 1980s when nothing was happening, nothing was going to happen, and you had to find out what to do with yourself. The younger generation's discomfort with stillness, with a single thought unaccompanied by a notification, with a silence not broken by a scroll, is a cultural condition Gen X has never shared. They remember the thing before it. They know it can be done. They are one of the few living American groups who do. When you show up for someone without announcing it, without posting about it, without expecting a thank you that matches the effort, you are doing something almost no other generation knows how to do anymore. It is not that you do not want credit. It is that you never learned to require it in order to be willing. One more thing before the video ends. What I am about to say is the part I would most want remembered 6 months from now. The previous traits were the surface of this generation. This is what sits underneath all of them. The consequence-first brain, the privacy instinct, the defensive optimism, the competence loyalty, the comfort with aloneness. Together, they describe a generation whose identity was formed in the absence of witness. Psychologists call this identity formation without witness. And once an identity has been built in that absence, being witnessed becomes something the person chooses carefully, on their own terms, rather than defaults to. Gen X is not invisible by accident. They are invisible by preference that started as circumstance and became, over time, a value. The culture does not notice them because they have not asked the culture to notice them. Remember the frame I opened with, the unwatched generation. Here is where that frame starts to show its full shape. That is not a failure of the generation. It is their defining signature. The weight this generation carries is not loneliness. Gen X is fine alone. The weight is something quieter. It is the experience of watching two generations on either side of them receive massive cultural attention, while their own generation is, as they have come to expect, skipped. The boomers got the spotlight. The millennials got the analysis. Gen X got neither. The specific psychological condition of having been overlooked your whole life, and of having adapted so thoroughly that being overlooked no longer hurts in the way it used to, is not the same thing as not feeling it. It means the feeling is present but has nowhere to go, not overlooked, unburdened, not skipped, unweighted, not invisible, undistracted. But the absence of attention has produced something the attended generations do not have. A generation of people who did not build their identity around being watched. And that means, for Gen X, the self is more durable, less audience-dependent, less prone to collapse when the audience turns away. Which is exactly why they can be skipped by the culture and still be here, still functioning, still carrying whatever work needs to be carried. They were never running on the culture's attention to begin with. They were running on themselves. The culture has spent decades skipping over your generation. Every time it has done this, it has lost something. You are the only generation with a direct memory of how things worked before the current version of everything. That memory is not nostalgic. It is functional. It is the reason the machinery keeps running. What you just watched was the most overlooked living generation being described the way they rarely get described. Precisely, without nostalgia, without pity, without the cultural romance that usually softens the descriptions of other generations. This generation does not want the romance. They want accuracy. If this video got even part of that accuracy right, you know it. Your children have what they have because you built it in a decade that was not built for what you were trying to build. The fact that they are softer than you is not evidence of your failure. It is evidence of your success. Softness is what you made room for. It is what you never got. If this video reached you, whether you are the generation it described or someone who loves one of them, subscribe so the next one finds you. And if you want to mark this one, leave a single year in the comments. The year of your birth if you are Gen X. The year of your parents' birth if you are here for someone else. Just the year. I read them. Generation X was never invisible. They were the last Americans who could live without being seen.